Welcome to Audio Branding, the hidden gem of marketing. Sound plays a more important role in human behavior and our decision-making than you may realize. In this podcast, I'll help you understand the art and science of sound so you can better influence others in business and your life. I'm your host, Jodi Krangle. Let's delve a little deeper. As we're speaking of that, I have to ask you where sound fits into that in the way that, like, do you ever help people figure out how to get a point across in the right way of speaking or to be compelling in the way that they speak?
Yeah, some of it is voice and some of it is language options, right? There's also a third element depending on audience, which is when to speak. So when we get into, a lot of it is basically word choice. So I don't really try to change people's voice too much. Like if you look at me when I'm a panel moderator or interviewer or this kind of case, I don't have like a wildly different personality unless I'm doing like an imitation of something. But, and you know this from doing voiceovers, right? Your voiceover voice is different depending on the situation from other voiceover voices and from your conversational voice.
But it's still me.
It's still you.
Yeah. The idea is that it's supposed to be as natural as possible, still being me getting, caring about that thing that I'm talking about.
Right.
And yeah, it's the caring and the putting yourself in that situation that gets your voice to where it needs to be. You're not actually forcing your voice into something.
Exactly.
So yeah, I imagine it's probably pretty similar to what you're telling people.
If I tell people to polish too much, right? If I'm like, oh yeah, your word choices are sloppy, you too much, I'll try to coach people out of that. But the thing that you have to keep the authenticity, but maybe it's a vocal speed thing. Maybe you talk too quickly when you're very excited about your technology. Okay, back that off a bit, but use the same words, have the same energy, just have a little bit of focus. Sometimes there are things you say in-house versus in front of a customer. The way you talk about security, you have to be precise in a lot of things you do in technology because you're trying to apply to a very particular thing. So when I talk about, the difference between a nanometer and an angstrom in my industry is crucial. And I can't, in some cases, I can say that things are more or less something, more secure, less secure. I can't always give like a 23% property, right? So you pick your choices. Pick your choices. That sounds silly, but like you make your choices based on your audience. The thing that I'll do in a lot of times when I do like voice work or moderator kind of stuff, it's the same thing with you, right? It has to be your voice.
Yeah.
So it's a speed thing, but it's also like my on-air personality is basically in PR me. We've taken some of the more colorful word choices out. There's less air coming through my noise. It's a lot of the diaphragm. Like, this is not involved. It's more bass than treble. But that's just
less nose voice. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not kind of talking out of this. But that's just something I developed having done like, some voiceover work, some voice of God kind of work announcing at events where that has a little bit more presence to it. But when you get into situations where it's like multiple speakers or you're trying to hand off to a customer, it's you and your customer, you and your technical partner. It's me and I do a lot of panels at DragonCon now. I moved out of the basement and I'm on stage with guests, like celebrity, like legit celebrity guests. And my job is transmission medium. I'm there as a moderator to get them connected to the audience, much in the way a presenter is trying to connect somebody to a product or somebody to an idea. Sure. And when I talk has to be very specific and why I talk has to be specific. So what I'll do is it's, as a moderator, you find you have you're already trying to get to the next transition. The guest is running a little long. You want to get them to the next question. And when do I head that horse off at the pass? And then how do if I've got 5 different joke options loaded as the way to transition, which one do I pick? Or do I chuck them all out of the bin because they changed their flow at the last minute and we went less humorous and more serious? So it's the same thing from that presenter standpoint. If they are up there to set up someone else or set up a solution or set up a transition from A to B, get to that transition in the most logical way and then lay off. Let the solution speak for itself. Let the guest do most of the talking. And so a lot of times they feel like they have to pack this thing with so much dense information. And I'm like, dude, you have 30 minutes and you have 3 of those to hook somebody. And you still need to leave a little bit for Q&A. You still need to leave a little bit for engagement. So if you're not going to answer everybody's question about something highly technical in the span of a podcast or the span of a technical talk, the span of an explainer video, you always have to get them to that act. They need to take a step and learn more. And that's where then you get a next level of engagement. You have a more detailed conversation. You have a one-on-one with somebody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense.
Leave some space in your stuff.
Yeah. There's something to be said for silence, actually. Mm-hmm. I mean, in public speaking, at least. When it comes to your guests, though, that you're interviewing for DragonCon TV, mm-hmm. I'm curious about a couple of things. And one of them is, how do you make them more comfortable?
Yeah, that is tough because I have 2 different formats I work with DragonCon TV, and they're both now live. I used to do a lot of on-camera interviews, like 5 or 6 minute segments for DVDs. Like I used to burn DVDs and sell them as part of the convention. We don't do that anymore. But like a lot of like YouTube stuff, 2-3 minutes, teaser interview segment, like news segment kind of stuff. And then I'm doing on-stage interviews, either a segment as part of our morning show, which we call the late show, because if you're up at 9 a.m. at DragonCon, you stayed up late from the night before. I'm the only idiot who gets up that early, plus my co-host and my guests. Or I'm on stage with a panel type scenario for a full hour. So it's me and Marina Baccarin. It's me and the bridge crew of Strange New Worlds. It's me and, fill in the blank. And actors are not always outgoing people. Some actors are actually introverts, and they some of those folks really love the panel environment. They feed off of it, mm-hmm. and then they will go back in their little cocoon at the end of the hour.
Yeah.
And it takes a moment to bring them out. So part of that is I rarely dive straight into questions with the audience because it's a little intimidating if they haven't done a con before. Because if they're a famous guest, like the Gina Torres came to DragonCon, she was one of the first people I did a live stage panel with in 2018. And she kind of peeked out from behind the curtain and was like, that room's full. And I'm like, yeah, that's 2,200 people. Like, they're here to see me. I'm like, you were in Firefly. Like, what? You're Jessica Pearson. Like, of course people are here to see you. And so what I'll typically do is, one, I warm up the audience a little bit. I give them the spiel on how this should run. I have a format, one question, no multi-part questions. It's a Q&A, not a C&A. We're not doing comments. You don't have to tell them you love them because you stood in the line and the humidity and the occasional thunderstorms at DragonCon in September. We all know this. Are you ready to go? Yay, big cheer. That builds the room energy up a little bit. I normally write an intro for the guests. So they've got something to come out on stage. They are actors after all. There's a little bit of like, okay, yeah, I have my moment. Like Wallace Day, who was in second season of Batwoman. I gave her an option. I'm like, do you want to come up side stage or you want to come backstage? She's like, I am an actor. I want an entrance. And I'm like, there we go. So you're coming up the big ramp off the back of the stage.
Okay, then.
Like, we're doing this. And then there's always a warm-up kind of backstage. I normally have very little interaction with these guests before the panel. Like, we're going through agents and that sort of thing. I sometimes will meet a guest 1 minute before they go up. So, and sometimes I get to work with the same guest over and over, like Crew of the Expanse, Strange New Worlds. I've gotten to work with them multiple times, which is great because there's a little bit of a rapport. They don't remember it all year round, but they come back and go, oh, yeah, it's you. We did our first panel together like 3 years ago. I'm like, yeah, thanks for coming back. And then it's anything you want to talk about, like you absolutely have to do it. Of course, we're plugging your podcast. Sure, let's do that because everybody has a podcast now. He says on your podcast. Is there anything we shouldn't talk about? Should I deflect from the audience? And that's your safety zone, question. Right? Yeah. Now you understand that I'm not just going to feed you to the wolves because fandom is great, but fandom is also sometimes fandom. You've been on the internet. We know what we're talking about. So it's do I coach the people in the audience with the microphones to like stay away from this stuff because they'll screen questions? Because that gives me the option of I can be the jerk. Like I will be the a-hole so they don't have to be, right? So as part of the conduit to the audience, I can be a valve. I can cut them off. I can redirect. I can go, we're not talking about that. And
Who has the power to the microphone?
Yeah. So I'm setting up kind of a space for them so that they get to be as authentic as they want to be, but we're not going to talk about someone's divorce on stage. We're not going to talk about someone's court case, right? We're not going there. This isn't TMZ. So in those cases, now I try to build up as quick a rapport as I can with these people who I am now responsible for the next hour on stage. It's not like we're live broadcasting this to the world or anything, except we totally are. And then I try to find an icebreaker moment. So between getting everybody seated and everybody lining up for questions, I'll give them a chance to talk about something. And in some cases I have that prepped, and in some cases I have to cue it based on what they gave me. So, like last time I talked to Anson Mount, which is a thing I just say now in conversation. Yeah, last time I talked to Captain Pike. Yeah. Anyway, he had just seen the movie RRR, the big Indian Bollywood 3-hour action throw lions at British people, adventure. And they literally throw a lion at a British person. He probably totally deserved it.
Wow.
And in that case, so we were talking backstage and you saw this cool movie, and then he gets to gush about it, and that opens him up a little bit. Then the cast gets to talk back and forth, and then we go into things. And then I've got cues I can give on like, hey, we're running out of time, or this is the last question. And I'm the person who always says it's the last question. I don't leave that to the guest, because now I'm the jerk who cut them off from their famous person. They didn't do it. This idiot in a colorful shirt said, I'm sorry, we have to go. So I'm essentially a buffer, a valve between those two sides. And in some cases, when I'm doing technical work, I'm the same thing. I sometimes have to be in the middle of a sales process. And so I'm the bridge between the salesperson and the customer, because I'm the technical expert. They're the account lead, right? So I can kind of put myself in that position, and I don't have to lead the conversation, but I have these nice handoff points of, okay, we've done the demo. You got any more questions? Now it's time we can hand off to the next part of the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot going on in there to unpack.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious, actually, though, who is the most famous person that you've ever interviewed?
Oh, boy. Technically didn't interview George Takei or William Shatner. I just introduced them on stage.
Okay.
They've done science fiction conventions since we invented them.
Yeah.
Because Star Trek is kind of the reason we have them. So I didn't have to do anything there.
No intro needed.
I am
really.
literally the person getting them off and on the stage. Okay.
Yeah.
Flip that. Wow. It's going to be your level of fame, right? I think Gina Torres is up there.
Sure.
Marina Baccarin is up there.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, like when I started interviewing, they weren't as famous, but like Anson Mount is kind of now more of a household name because of Strange New Worlds.
So is the hair as nice in real life?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, it's he doesn't carry around what we now call Pike's Peak the whole year. But it's good. All his. It is all his, and so he has a similar style during the year. And then I don't know if you saw there's an episode that
when he plays
Elysian Kingdom, he plays the fop, and that's still all his hair. Like they just did this, and I tried so hard to convince them. Like I've had a back channel to their agent. I'm like, hey, just talk to the agent and ask, do they have those costumes? Because
that would be so funny.
They couldn't get them, right? They were like rentals or something, and they weren't like the studio. The studio doesn't actually do. At DragonCon, the studio doesn't do their panel setups, right? They're rep through their own agents. Something like Comic-Con, it's different. The studio is more involved. This is more one-on-one with the guest versus promoting the show, if that makes any logical sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So I don't have access to Paramount. I have access to, Ethan Peck's con person. But yeah, I think the people that are in kind of the Star Trek area. I mean, I've interviewed Walter Koenig, not on stage. I've done a couple sit-down interviews with him. Delightful
Anyone
man.
from the Marvel universe?
Benedict Wong.
Okay.
Which was
my
legit first panel. Like the year they moved me from just doing the video stuff to being the on-camera talent.
Yeah.
Like the on the stage.
Sure.
Benedict Wong was a 10 a.m. Friday panel. He had gotten Wong, but Endgame hadn't come out yet. This is 2018, right? So I don't think they were all the way through like the Endgame scenario. He didn't have the Disney series. He wasn't on She-Hulk yet. He wasn't Shang-Chi wasn't done yet. And so it was because of his schedule, he wasn't there multiple days. So I had like one of his smaller panels, and it wasn't recorded, unfortunately. It's an amazing interview because it was weird because, and he's one of those where I got him like, he was a minute late because there was a transportation problem.
Yeah.
And so his handler is rushing to get him. So they bring him in through the front door, not the backstage, because the backstage in the hotel I was at is like a labyrinth. It was impossible to find.
Sure.
So, I'm like, we're just going to wait a minute. And he like bursts through the door and he's like, ignore me. Like, I'm not here yet. And then he sneaks behind the table and they introduce him and he comes back up and he's funny as hell. Like, he's such a kind of open and funny person. And I knew that there were things around like racism and casting and problems he had working with the industry and a bunch of things where I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to address these because yes, I am the person to talk about racism and colorism and casting, right? So it's hard for me sometimes to broach those subjects.
Yeah.
And, I have a place to be. That probably isn't it. But he was, with almost no prep time, I didn't have a chance to like, hey, is there anything I got to buffer you from? He's like, no, I'll take everything. And then like the first question out the gate is about, why don't you do these kind of roles anymore? And he's self-rep. He doesn't have an agent anymore because his agent kept giving him like these Hong Kong gangster jobs. And he's like, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
And so he went self-repped. He got himself the role as Wong. He started the writing campaign and the Twitter campaign through a friend of his for
him.
hashtag Wong for Wong, which is just perfect.
That's
right?
Brilliant.
And yeah, so that like at the time he was known, like he was doing like he was playing like he was in a Netflix series as Kubla Khan, the Kubler Gang, I guess I can't remember now, but he had good roles and he was known, but now like the end game, like the Avengers stuff just shot him up. So he's one of those, like I haven't had a chance to work with him again, but he's one of those that like you kind of caught him at this interesting point as he's moving up in his career.
Yeah. I'd love to see an interview with him, now. Like that would be, it would be really interesting.
Yeah. And the problem is once you hit those levels with guests, sometimes it's hard to get them back because you get schedules and contracts and things.
Of course.
But yeah, and the thing is, a lot of these folks, when they do their first con, they come out like the crew from The Expanse. I did the first con they came to was Dragon Con. I did their first panel, and they were late, and they come into this full room, has been waiting on them because the van got stuck on Peachtree Street.
Oh no!
And they do this whole panel, and they backstage are like, is it always like this? I'm like, yeah, it's always like this. This is bananas. Like how do we do more of this? I'm like, you just keep coming back. And they were like, we got to walk over to this hotel. Can we just go through the hallway? Like, can we just walk among the people? And I'm sitting there looking at their handler, and their handler's behind me like
maybe that's not such a good idea.
Their security detail is like, I don't know if I'm like, well, if your handler lets you, here's the way you would get there, and here's what you would see, and here's what you want to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just famous at Dragon Con is relative, right?
Sure.
Like, we're going gaga over the Firefly crew, and like people are like, yeah, she was that woman at the Lawyer show on USA, right? I'm like, no, you got a different sphere of operation.
Well, I'm sure that we could probably talk about Dragon Con and all of the famous people that you have spoken to for a very long time, and I would love to hear that. But unfortunately, we are out of time.
Yeah, you're a good moderator, by the way. You're setting. It's not my fault. It's hers. She did it. I'm sorry,
it's
audience.
My fault. I'm sorry. But thank you so much. This has been a really, really great conversation, and I just want to give you a moment to talk about what you're working on now and how people can get in touch with you if they want to.
Yeah, so the personal side of my social media is at Silicon Chef. I'm on Twitter until we, atom bomb ride that thing into the ground, like at the end of Doctor Strangelove. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram, and I occasionally put photos up on Flickr. I haven't updated that in a while. I'm also Silicon Chef on YouTube. And most of what I'm doing on YouTube right now is home improvement. One of my far too many hobbies is farm maintenance. When my wife and I moved to Oregon, we bought a few more horses, bought a bigger farm. And so I have this ongoing series called Nerdsteading, where during the pandemic, I started since I had nowhere to go, started working on this like 40-year-old barn that is on my property and redoing the workshop and documenting some of the projects I'm doing from a moderately skilled home improvement standpoint. I'm not going to be doing dovetail joints in a clean workshop on PBS anytime soon, but you will see me being sad about roof leaks and doing a full demolition on a workshop, and eventually releasing a video where I built a chicken coop that looks like a TARDIS.
Oh, well, that'd be cool for the
chickens. It's the police box. Bok, police box. So, yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, that is good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate you taking the time today. This has been a lot of fun.
It's good talking to you again in 2D this time. We'll do 3D later.
Yes, I look forward to that.
All right, have fun.
You too.
Well, that's the end of this episode. Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, why not tell a friend about this podcast? It's available in all the usual locations. Until next time.